Good morning, everyone. We're going to wait for people to jump onto the link and trickle in slowly. And while they're doing that, I will do my stock standard, which is say good morning, but secondly, to do my icebreaker, which I love to do when it's not just me speaking at a screen. So, Helen, I'm so glad you're here for this icebreaker because I tossed off about it and I thought, what could I ask? I've done things like, would you rather do the desert or cold weather, all of these things. But I thought, today, I might ask, would you rather never eat a vegetable ever again or never eat a fruit ever again for the rest of your life? What would
Oh, that's easy. It would definitely be a vegetable. I couldn't,
really?
yes, I couldn't live without eating fruit.
I know. And what's your fruit of choice in particular?
It depends on the season and
Yeah, yeah.
probably what I'm eating it with. Love cheese and apple. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah,
that's the perfect pairing, but you can't get through summer without eating endless cold melon from the fridge, right? So,
that's right. Yeah. I mean, it was so funny. I went to Pack and Save last week and I remember walking past the mangoes going, oh, there's mangoes. And then seeing that they're $10 a mango and slowly
yeah,
scurrying
not
away.
yet.
Yes, not yet. I'm originally from Sydney, so mangoes, we'd get like 20 mangoes for $15 and it would be
Yes,
happening.
praise of them.
Yeah, but definitely not here. Oh, so that's really good. Is there any vegetable of choice that is not a vegetable, that you might not want to be around or ever go near ever again if you could choose one?
Not really. I try not to be too fussy,
Ah,
and
nice.
if it's good for you, I kind of think I should probably eat it. Not a
Yeah.
huge fan of broccoli, but my daughter makes me eat it, so I can't get away with that.
Oh no, see, this is why we have kids, right? It's so that they can.
Yeah, it comes full circle from making her eat little trees when she was little. Now she's like, Mum, eat
That's
broccoli.
right. Oh gosh, no. Well, that's brilliant. Well, it's good to know. Now I know what to get you if we were to meet in person.
Yes,
I'll do a
yeah,
fruit
for my
basket.
Christmas hamper, a
Yeah,
fruit hamper,
yeah,
please.
right. Don't do a vegetable one. Whoever does
No,
vegetable hampers for
don't send me
Christmas.
potatoes.
It's not a good idea. All right. Well, I can see that people are starting to trickle onto the link. So I'm really glad to have everybody here this morning. Thank you so much for jumping on. We've got quite a lot to cover, so I'll kick things off now. And I just wanted to say good morning. Welcome, everyone. So excited to have you all here today because we are going to be talking about something that we haven't actually really touched on during the webinars that I've run in my time here over the last, almost 3 years. And that is to do with migrant workers. We're talking about the compliance behind it today and what it means to hire a migrant worker when you are looking at accreditation and different aspects of hiring, whether it's the recognized seasonal worker visa, all of those kinds of things. So I'll kick things off by just saying to everybody that today the webinar is going to be recorded. You also have the opportunity to ask questions. We have an amazing, amazing expert in the field, and I'm so glad to say that we've got Helen here today. Helen Strange is somebody that is a senior immigration advisor, and I can tell you what, it is an amazing asset to have because there are so many times that I want to ask a question and I'm like, who do I go to? And the Immigration New Zealand website just sends me in for a loop. So I'm really glad that you guys have the ability to ask questions today. Of course, if it's anything specific and it's specific advice, then you can always reach out to Helen directly and ask, those specific questions. And today we'll cover some more general ones and more about the process as well. So, Helen, if I can just pass over to you before we continue on with the housekeeping, let me know a little bit about you. Is your passion immigration? What kind of drew you into this space?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me here this morning. First of all, it's a pleasure to be presenting with you and to be presenting to Employment Heroes clients. So I moved to New Zealand back in 2007 and I came as a migrant. And I've been a licensed immigration advisor now since 2016, so almost 10 years. I spent the first part of my career running my own immigration consultancy with my sister, and have been over with Ames Global now for about 13, 14 months, and I'm one of the two senior licensed immigration advisors here. I do love working in immigration. I still remember how exciting it was to get my first work visa and to apply for and get my residence. That shine has not faded for me, and I love being able to do the same for other migrants. Um, a lot of my work is kind of split between working directly with migrants and then also directly with employers. And I really enjoy both sides of that. It's always satisfying getting residents from migrants. I love those phone calls. But I also really, really enjoy the direct business work that I do. Helping businesses to navigate the ever-changing immigration landscape, setting their businesses up to make sure that they're able to retain the kind of skilled workers that they need. And I think that period that I spent being a business owner really makes me understand, when working with employers, how difficult it can be, the different constraints on your time, the endless pulls that you have with all the different tasks that you do. So my role when I'm working with employers is to take one of those major headaches away for you and to manage that immigration process.
Oh, that is brilliant. And you're so absolutely right, Helen, that the excitement that someone feels to actually be able to get that residency or the ability to work in New Zealand, or vice versa, the employer being able to
Yeah,
actually hire somebody is, I don't think anybody understands unless you've been in that situation of how truly exciting it feels for both parties.
yeah,
Because it is, as we will see today, a bit of an uphill battle to get to that stage. And also it's a way for people to be able to actually, send some money back home to families. My family's originally from Fiji, and I've grown up with
yeah,
uncles coming over and working in
yeah,
New Zealand, sending money back, and money that would be maybe $4 an hour in Fiji,
yeah.
versus coming here and getting so much more for their family. So it is a really massive thing, and I'm so excited for you to kind of share your expertise, because that is an amazing, amazing thing to actually be somebody that has gone through a bit of the system as well in terms of being an immigrant coming over. Things like that is really probably beneficial to what you've done in the space as well. Kind of having that hat as well of having experienced it. So this is really awesome. And what I wanted to say to everybody is just remember that this is recorded, so no need to be frantically writing any of this down. We will be sending you a pack of information after this. That's all part of the post-webinar materials. So we'll have information in there, as well as the slides, the recording, all of that good stuff as we usually do. And also keep in mind that this is a Q&A webinar. So we will be going through and actually, answering your questions at the end. And so just make sure that you stick around until then. Also, just a disclaimer from my end, this is all provided to you in good faith. Remember that if you need specific advice, the amazing thing is that I have Helen on this webinar, which means you can reach out to Helen directly, and we will have all of her details at the end of the presentation on the last slide. And before we probably move on, you might want to know who's speaking at you. My name is Sanam. I'm the Employment Counsel here at Employment Hero, and I eat, live, and breathe employment law. And today I will be living, and breathing it even more by learning about immigration law, which ties in so much into employment law. So this is very, very exciting for me as well. I have pen and paper ready, and I will be probably going back and watching this recording. So we'll kick things off by kind of just looking at a quick agenda just to see what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be talking about the recognized seasonal employer visa all the way through to employer accreditation, and we know how complicated that is. And the best thing that I saw as I was kind of flicking through the slides was that Helen has absolutely just future-proofed this as well, and look, what are the compliance pain points? What are the ways that we can actually help moving forward? Because that is it, right? Sometimes you're kind of in this rat race of trying to get things done now, but you're not thinking about how you can kind of future-proof. So it is
Yeah.
really going to be a great webinar. So we'll kick things off by first looking at the recognized seasonal employer. And this is very interesting because before we jumped on, I know, Helen, I mentioned that I live quite rural, and that means horticulture, viticulture, all of that good stuff is so, so prevalent in the town that I live in. And I know that sometimes, these different visas can feel very complicated, especially for a migrant worker that's trying to apply for them, as well as for the businesses. So is there any piece of advice that you have, or could you go through the process to kind of break down exactly what this visa looks like, who can tap into it, and what the systems are in New Zealand around it?
Okay, so let me just move on our slides one section. I'm not sure that that's working for me just yet. Here we go. So yeah, as Sanam mentioned, we're going to start off with looking at the recognised seasonal employer scheme. And this is a scheme that started back in 2007, introduced by Immigration New Zealand. I still don't have control of the screen, unfortunately. If someone can move that slide on for me. Brilliant, thank you so much. So it started back in 2007, and the scheme has really become the kind of main driver of the mobility of labour between New Zealand and those Pacific states that you can see on the screen. It is just for work in horticulture and viticulture, and it allows New Zealand employers to hire from those nations to cover those seasonal labour shortages. It's got a couple of stages to it. The first stage is applying to become a recognised seasonal employer. That has a fee of about $1,040, and it can take up to 10 months to process that application. So thinking about how, if you're interested in becoming a recognised seasonal employer, you do need to future plan for this. That first stage taking up to 10 months to apply for, and it is a paper-based application, so it's not something that you can do online. Yeah. Once you've got your recognised seasonal employer status confirmed, you then apply for the ART, which is the Agreement to Recruit. There's another fee for that, that's $280, and that can take up to 4 months to process. So you're looking at least a year, if not a little bit longer, to get actually started on this scheme, and that's before your migrants have applied for visas. Before you apply for the Agreement to Recruit, you must list your vacancies with WINS. And that's a real key little sort of point that doesn't come up a lot in a lot of the information that's provided by Immigration New Zealand. The recognised seasonal employer registration lasts for 12 months, and then you can apply to renew that. And Immigration New Zealand are currently advising that those renewals are taking about 4 months. So you need to be thinking about doing that at least 4 months in advance. Once you've got your recognised seasonal employer status and you've got your Agreement to Recruit, you can then offer the visa, which is the RSE Limited Visa. Now, there are some important things that the employer must agree to do, and just still struggling to move on to the next slide, so if someone can do that for me. So there are some things that the employer must agree to if they're to be hiring compliantly, and also to be registered as a seasonal employer. You must provide accommodation for your migrant workers. This needs to be clean, safe accommodation. It needs to be provided at a reasonable cost. You need to be offering full-time work, so that's at least 30 hours a week. One of the really key parts for the employers here is you must be providing pastoral care for your migrant employees. This is things from providing orientation for your migrants when they first arrive in New Zealand, through to doing regular welfare checks. In fact, you must even have a dedicated person within your business as the pastoral care manager. So that is a part of the scheme that immigration take really seriously. You have to agree to cover at least half of the return travel for your migrant workers. And often what employers will do here is they will cover the full amount of travel, and then they will claw back up to half of that from the employees once they start working in New Zealand. You have to provide meals or cooking facilities, transport to and from work, and to and from local amenities if the accommodation is quite remote or rural. And there is quite a lot of compliance and reporting in this scheme. There are regular reports you must provide to Immigration New Zealand, and set compliance requirements that you are required to meet. That's the kind of thing that gets checked once you apply to renew your registration. So thinking a little bit more about the actual visa that results from this, and that will be on my next slide. So this is the Recognised Seasonal Employer Limited Visa. And a limited visa is a certain category of visas with Immigration New Zealand. And if someone could move on to the next slide for me. Thank you. And so what does, oh, we've missed one. Never mind, we can stay there. So what does a limited visa mean? It means that the holder cannot apply for any other visa once they're here in New Zealand. So one of the important things I think for employers is, when considering becoming a recognised seasonal employer, one of their concerns is that they go to the expense of applying for the scheme, bringing migrant workers over, and then will potentially lose them to more permanent roles locally. Well, a migrant isn't able to apply for another work visa once they are here. They can potentially move between recognised seasonal employers in certain circumstances, but they can't apply for a different visa. They can work for up to 7 months in an 11-month period for the most part. And there is a cap of the maximum amount of visas that can be applied for under the scheme. It's currently at about 21,000 a year. Now, your migrants are going to need to confirm that they have good health and good character. And if they've been in New Zealand previously on any other type of visa, either whether they had this particular limited visa before or they were here on a visitor visa, for example, they may well then need medicals and police certificates. So when you're looking at the migrants that you're hiring, not only is it important to know that they can do the job for you that you're advertising for or that you need to fill, but you also need to think about what's their previous immigration history and are they going to need to provide extra documentation on that visa application. They've got to be offshore when they lodge their application and they've got to be over 18. And it's not a visa that allows them to support visas for immediate family. So they can't bring their partner, they can't bring their children. One more point to mention is that they do need to have medical insurance to cover them for whilst they're in New Zealand. And that's part of the application process that they make themselves. They have to provide evidence of that medical insurance. So we are seeing that this scheme is being reviewed at the moment. I think it's been under review for about 2 years already. I'm not quite sure of that, but we are expecting to see some outcomes on that review early next year with recommendations being presented to the Minister. And you can see here what some of the key parts of that review include. So it's looking at the cap on the number of visas, labour market testing for employers, and that's kind of that advertising your roles with wins before you get the agreement to recruit. It's really very worker focused, so making sure that that pastoral care is being provided, worker rights are being met. Obviously, for Immigration New Zealand, migrant exploitation is always a hot topic. It's something that they're always considering in any visa scheme. And they're also reviewing the countries that are currently part of the scheme. It is primarily focused on Pacific nations, although it can be extended to other nations in certain circumstances. So the review will also be looking a lot at that.
And then, Helen, if I could just ask, with the RSE visa, do you find it because it's paper-based, like you said, which I was just shocked at. But
Yeah.
I do expect this though, because Fiji is very much paper-based as well.
Yes.
Do you find it that it's quite difficult to go through the process to get it over the line, or is it usually just like the checklist that you sent through? Is it more just ticking the boxes, or are there certain hurdles that generally come up?
Oh, look, it's a 3-stage process with getting registered, getting the approval to recruit, and then getting the visa.
Yeah.
So you've got, 3 gates that you've got to get through, and you need to make sure that each of those stages you're meeting all of the requirements of that stage.
Yeah.
So
it can be
difficult. It can be difficult, and that can really depend on, the employer for those first 2 stages, how well they're able to demonstrate that they meet the criteria to become registered. And that they've met the criteria to be able to get that agreement to recruit, and then that they are able to find the migrant workers that they need, and that those migrant workers are able to show that they meet the criteria of the visa. So it can be complex. It's not necessarily difficult, but it is something that needs a good attention to detail.
Yeah, and that's such a fair point as well. I mean, even with the accreditation, which we're going to talk about now, it's not just that you've got sometimes migrant workers just waiting in the wings. It's the fact that you've got to go through this whole process and then start looking and trying to see, what workers might be out there, rather than you kind of working backwards from it, because you might not have migrant workers that you've got kind of in your Rolodex.
Yes, yeah, absolutely,
Waiting for
absolutely.
someone. Yeah, so, and with the employer accreditation, look, my experience with this many, many years ago, I remember during COVID and just after COVID, I was working in advisory and it was for
Mm.
hospitality. And of course, we were going through all the job checks and everything at that time. And I can tell you that it was the most stressful thing was the accreditation applications and just to be working with Immigration New Zealand, trying to give employers some sort of certainty around
Mhm,
what they need to
mhm.
do, timelines, and all of that. And it always felt like it was up in the air. So, I mean, the question to you would be, how bad is this? Is it really hard? How do we do the process? And if I'm an employer trying to get accredited, is
Mm.
it worth doing it in 2025, Helen? Is it?
Oh, I think it's, look, if you're unable to find the skill sets that you need in New Zealand, and I
Yeah,
think that is the experience of a lot of employers in New
there is.
Zealand, then yes, it is absolutely worth doing.
Mm,
When you were in that previous role, that was back at the start of accreditation, and any new scheme has teething problems, and this one definitely had them.
mm,
We went from it initially being launched and it being a bit of a mess and no one really quite knowing what was happening from the industry side, but also from the Immigration New Zealand side. It got a lot smoother, but then it was a very open gate policy and you could get anything you liked. We then saw the migrant exploitation disaster happen.
mm.
Everything got very tightened up. That blew processing times out the water. People were waiting 6, 7, 8 months to get a job check approved. Um, but we are in a much more smooth period now. Processing times are really normal. We see lots of changes all the time. So making sure that you are responsive to those changes is still really important. It's a tight system. You have to tick the boxes. But if you know how to do it, which luckily I do, and we do at Ames Global, then it's definitely worth doing. Being able to access that skill base from all around the world I think, is really crucial to New Zealand.
Yeah, oh, that's fantastic. And look, I would love to hear more about this. Like I said, I've got pen and paper ready. So Helen, take it away. Let us know. Your track record is really good from from what you've said. So I'm really excited about this. I feel positive.
Absolutely. Okay, so looking at employer accreditation.
Mm,
So let me see if I can move this one on. Here we go. So obviously, I'm not sure how many of our attendees today are already accredited with Immigration New Zealand or maybe thinking about doing it. So I'll just give you a brief overview of the scheme to start with. So employer accreditation is a 3-stage scheme. The first stage is the business getting accredited, and that's the kind of registration with Immigration New Zealand. The second stage is the job check. Now that's the permissions to hire in vacancies that you have in your business. And the last stage is the accredited employer work visa. So that's the migrant coming in at the end and applying for the work visa for your role. Now, we're going to look at accreditation first of all, and there are a number of criteria that you do need to meet. You need to be a lawfully or legally operating business. So you need to have an IRD number, New Zealand business number. You need to be filing your accounts, lawfully operating business. You need to be compliant with employment and immigration law. And there are questions on the accreditation application around whether any of your directors, shareholders, key people have ever experienced any problems here or on any sort of kind of stand down lists. Immigration want to be sure that you are financially viable as a business. Just to kind of explain a little bit about the context behind that. Obviously, Immigration New Zealand have a duty of care to the migrants that they issue visas to. And if they were to issue, for example, a 5-year work visa to a migrant who then relocated to New Zealand and the company that employed them folded 3 months after they arrived, they would not be upholding that duty of care to their migrants. So they need to be sure that you're financially viable and you're able to offer ongoing work to the migrants that you're hiring. You need to be agreeing to provide migrant settlement support to your workers that come on the accredited employer work visa. And this is a really key part of accreditation. And it's key for 2 reasons. It's key in terms of your compliance with Immigration New Zealand. Migrant exploitation isn't a new thing. It's not something that just started in the accreditation scheme. It's always been there. And as I mentioned before, it's a key focus for Immigration New Zealand. They want to be sure that the migrants that they give visas to are going to be able to settle well in New Zealand. They're going to understand how to rent a house, how to register at the doctors, how to get an IID number, how to open a bank account, all of those kinds of things that migrants need to know when they first arrive. So it's important from a compliance point of view, but I think it's also really important for employers. If you're going to go to the time and expense of becoming accredited and getting your job check and hiring a migrant, you want to be able to retain them, right? You want to be able to keep them working in your business. And helping them settle well in New Zealand is a really crucial way to do that. It sets the tone from the very beginning of employment, so that they feel welcomed and feel worthy of being here in New Zealand and working for your business. Thinking about the different types of accreditation, there is standard or high volume are the two key main ones. Standard, you're looking to employ migrants up to 5 migrants within your accreditation period. High volume is basically 6 and above. Your accreditation period lasts for 12 months initially, and then you can renew that. There is also triangular accreditation, and we were talking just about that before we came online, Sanam. That's quite complex. That's basically for thinking mainly about labour hire businesses for the most part. So anywhere where you're hiring a migrant, but you're placing them with a different employer, and that's triangular accreditation. Getting accredited for the first time can feel fairly straightforward. It's an online application, and you're basically agreeing to a series of declarations that yes, you are financially viable, yes, you will provide migrant support, etc. And it can seem quite straightforward. I think a really important point to mention here is that when you come to renew your accreditation, it suddenly gets a lot more complex. Immigration at that point are going to be wanting to see evidence that all the things you agreed to do in that original accreditation application, you have actually done. They're going to want to see evidence that you're still financially viable. So whilst it can seem quite straightforward, and we've certainly come across employers that have experienced problems with their renewals and have come to us, and they've just merrily ticked through the form and sent it off, and haven't really sort of considered what they need to do within their business during the period of their accreditation to stay compliant. Okay, we're going to move on to job checks, which is that second stage of the scheme. So what is a job check? Once your business is accredited, you then want to hire in the vacancies that you have, and a job check is how you do that. So it's basically permission from immigration to hire migrants into those vacancies. Job checks are needed for all accredited employer work visas, or if you're maybe thinking of employing a migrant that's already in New Zealand on an accredited employer work visa and they're going to move from their current job to your job, you're going to need a job check for that as well. And that's called a variation of conditions, sometimes referred to as a job change, but mainly a variation of conditions or a VOC. For either of those, you have to have a job check. You can use a job check for multiple vacancies. So for example, if your business is has vacancies for 4 carpenters, that's one job check for 4 roles, so long as the role is the same and the region is the same. If your business has got a vacancy for 2 carpenters and 2 plumbers, for example, that's 2 separate job checks. So multiple vacancies can be on one job check, but only if the role and the region is the same. The number of vacancies that you apply for on your job check results in job tokens. And the migrant uses that token to apply for the work visa in the next stage. Now, labour market test. Do you need a labour market test on your job check? And this is how you show to immigration that you've tried and failed to hire New Zealanders first. For most employers, yes, you will need a labour market test, but there are some situations where you don't. If your role is paying at least twice the median wage, you don't need to do a labour market test. Still need the job check, but you don't need that labour market test. If your role is on the green list, now the green list is a list of the hardest to hire roles in New Zealand, and that's determined by the government. If your role is on the green list and meets the exact requirements of the list, and they can be very specific, then you don't need a labour market test, because obviously immigration or the minister has already identified that these roles are impossible to recruit for in New Zealand. So what's the point of you having to show that you've tried and failed to recruit in those roles? All other job checks, you will need a labour market test. And how that labour market test looks is very specific to your role and the skill level of the role. I'll talk about that a little bit more in our next slide. One of the really important things to think about for your job check is your ANSCO code. So ANSCO codes, for those of you that don't know, ANSCO is a job classification website used by Immigration New Zealand. Covers nearly all jobs that you can imagine for the most part. And you have to provide the closest matched ANSCO code on your job check. And that feeds through to the work visa as well for your migrants. There are some really important things to consider here. All jobs on ANSCO are rated in terms of their skill level from 1 to 5, 1 being the highest. Anything in a skill level 1 to 3, that's going to give you a 5-year work visa. Skill levels 4 and 5, going to give you a 3-year work visa. So that's your first consideration, is how long a visa your migrant is going to get. Those lower skill levels, they're also going to need an English language test. So that's another consideration. And we need to be thinking about remuneration levels as opposed to the skill level of the role. So there's an awful lot to consider in there, and making sure that you've got the best fit of ANSCO for your business and for your role is really, really crucial with your job check. Okay, so thinking about some of the key different parts of your job check, thinking first of all about your advertising, and this is if you need the labour market test. The advertising that Immigration New Zealand want to see is really descriptive. And if your advert does not contain everything that they want to see, you will run into problems with your job check application. The types of things that have to be included in your advert, for example, are the pay rate, the hours and the days of work, the region that the role is in. And as I say, immigration need to see these in the body of the advert. So it's not enough, for example, for you to put the pay rate in the back end of the advert. It actually has to be viewable in the advert body itself. Thinking about what you put in your advert, that also has to be reflected in the job description and on the job check application form. So whilst you want to make it prescriptive for your vacancy, you also don't want to make it too tight, because you need to think about how your migrant is going to evidence that they have those skills or attributes. You want to be clever about where you advertise. Vacancies in those ANSCO 1 to 3, they're going to require 14 days of national advertising. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the lower skilled roles and the advertising in a moment. National advertising. So for most people, they would automatically go to Trade Me or Seek. If you already have your migrant in mind, and what you're hoping from the end of your advertising is that you can clearly demonstrate that you have tried and failed to hire a New Zealander, you may want to consider using an advertising platform still acceptable by Immigration New Zealand for a job check, but perhaps attracts less traffic than Trade Me or Seek. And there's a number of those: Indeed, JobSpace, all kinds of different ones that are acceptable by Immigration New Zealand, but perhaps we'll see lower numbers of applications for you. Thinking about the skills that you put on your advert in terms of and how they reflect what you're wanting to see on ANSCO. They need to be a close representation of the ANSCO code, and you'll see when you look on ANSCO that it will list, for example, this job requires a holder to have 3 years of relevant work experience, for example. You don't need to reflect that exactly on your job check, but you need to be close to it. Thinking about how that actually practically works. I was working with an employer recently who's hiring a technician for their business. And the technician is kind of like a team manager role. So it's not just a regular technician role, it's a team manager role. Now on ANSCO, you've just got one code for technician. It doesn't separate who's a supervisor and who's just a team member. So looking at the advertising that they're doing and their job description and their job check form itself, they're looking for 3 years of previous work experience, but they want at least 1 year of that to have some kind of supervisory element to it. So they're looking for somebody that's got experience in that kind of team leader role. Now that's going to be fine. It's fairly close to ANSCO. It's not too far apart. Had they asked for 5 years previous work experience and at least 3 of those being in a supervisor role, that's quite a big leap, and you can expect to see that kind of difference come up with problems on your job check. Okay, we're going to have a little think about pay rate, and this can be quite complicated. So Immigration New Zealand, for a work visa and for a job check, want to see that you are paying a fair market rate. And this is something that changed earlier on this year. How do they determine what a fair market rate is? They generally use internal advice that they have, but they also use a series of online salary guides. Recently, we saw a new one be released by Immigration New Zealand, which is the primary source of market rate guidance that they want to see. But they also use Seek salary guides, Trade Me salary guides, and some industry specifics. So there are some IT ones and some hospo ones that they also refer to. Now, how does this compare against the median wage, which is probably a phrase a lot of you will have heard before? So median wage is currently set at $33.59 an hour, and that is a requirement for a lot of the residence visas that migrants will apply for. And what we know with migrant workers is most migrant workers coming to New Zealand on a work visa are ideally working towards residence. So you need to be thinking, when you're advertising your role and you're hiring your migrants, what is a fair market rate for my vacancy? But also, how am I going to retain my workers? Are they going to want to be on a pathway to residence? Do they actually need to be earning median wage? If I'm offering, for example, $31.50 an hour for my role, is it realistic for me, for my business, to actually be able to offer median wage so that my migrants can possibly be on a pathway towards residence? So a few different things to consider there in the pay rate. Now, I mentioned before about the low skilled roles. Now, these are your ANSCO skills 4 and 5, and these need to be advertised nationally as well, but they need to be advertised for 21 days. So an extra week compared to those higher skilled ANSCO codes. You also must engage with wins. Engage in good faith is the phrase that's currently being used by Immigration New Zealand. And this is something that for employers has changed this year. So earlier on in the year, you had to advertise your vacancy with wins. You had to wait for them to try and find candidates, screen the candidates that they provided to you, and wait for them to give you a skills check report, I think. No, it's not skills check report. Can't remember the exact title of it now, but wait for them to give you a report that confirmed that they hadn't been able to find candidates for you. Immigration softened these requirements and now require you to just engage in good faith with wins. But what does that actually mean? What we do know is that the minister feels that this engagement in good faith has not been happening. She was talking at one of our industry events a couple of weeks ago, and was talking about how many job checks were running into problems for those low skilled roles because immigration felt that the employer had not engaged in good faith with wins, although they're not really giving very clear guidance of exactly what they want employers to do. You need to be contacting wins and talking about your vacancy. You need to be listing it with them. It's not good enough just to send wins an email saying, I'd like to lodge an advert, and then 2 days later lodge your job check. That's not giving wins time that they need to look at whether they can find somebody for your vacancy. However, if wins are taking 5, 6, 7 weeks to get back to you, do you need to wait that long? Probably not. But you need records of those correspondence and that engagement with wins. Okay. So some common issues of job checks. I've talked a lot about these already, but this is just a little bit of a slide to kind of summarize those for you. ANSCO codes, selecting really carefully. One of the big changes we've seen, and I'll talk more about this later, recently, is that the employment contract is no longer part of the job check. That gets looked at on the work visa. However, you do still have to make some declarations on your job check form about your employment contract. You do need to include really clear terms and conditions around travel if that is required in your role. Immigration want to know exactly what happens with travel. for migrant workers? Are they reimbursed for their travel? Who provides the accommodation? So that really needs to be clearly detailed and may need to be detailed on the job check application form. Any bonding that you plan to do with your migrant workers. So if you are, for example, going to cover the cost of their work visas and then they're going to repay that out of their wages, or they will have to repay it if they leave your employment within a year, for example, that needs to be detailed on the job check application form. Labour market tests we've already talked about, and those minimum requirements for the role in the advert that have to be translated onto your job check application form as well.
Oh, wow. So, Helen, did you say with the bonding, so there are people that build into their employment agreements the fact that the migrant worker will need to pay back if they do
Yep.
6 months' time? And I guess because it is such a big push and a big effort and quite costly for the employer to have to advertise, go to market, and then also to bring someone over. So,
That's right. So with that stage scheme for accreditation, the employer has to pay for the first two stages. So it has to pay to get their business accredited, has to pay for the job check, has to pay for the advertising. That's not a migrant expense, and they cannot claw back any of those expenses. It's only that last stage. So sometimes employers will cover the cost of the work. So the migrant really is responsible for the cost of their own visa. But employers will often cover that. They might cover fees for an immigration advisor to help the migrant, and they may cover the cost of the actual Immigration New Zealand application fee. And they may have a bonding clause for that. And that needs to be declared on the job check. If it's not declared on the job check and then you added bonding clause into their employment agreement at the work visa stage, your work visa is going to run into problems, which is going to cause delays with processing. So yeah, it has to be clearly demonstrated and included in the job check.
okay, I've heard those delays are not fun. So yes, take Helen.
Never want immigration to start asking questions.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, brilliant. And so you were going to branch into visa responsibilities, is that right?
Yes, that's right. So we're going to have a look at some of those next.
Hmm.
And there we go. Okay, so there's lots of different things that we can cover in here. And I've got a few different slides to talk to you about this morning. The first thing I wanted to talk about in terms of visa responsibilities kind of links to some of that auditing stuff that I'm going to talk later. It's really important to keep clear files and clear records of your AEWV holders within your business. Immigration, if you are part of a post-compliance check, or if you're looking to renew your accreditation in the future, it's likely that you will need to have this information to hand. Immigration are expecting you to record their start date, record when you've provided them with settlement support, make sure that you've done that within the required period of time, which is 1 month from their start date. Have you done updates to their employment agreement? Have there been changes in employment laws and you've needed to provide amendments to their agreements? Make sure those are clearly recorded on the HR records for your AWV holders. Record their suitability check. Now, this is something that you agree to do when you get accredited, but it's something that is often missed by employers that aren't using advisors. It is important that you check your migrant workers are suitably qualified to do the job that you are offering to them. It's not enough just to have a copy of their CV on your records. They want to see that you have realistically checked that they've got the skills available. Now, of course, those skills are going to be determined on your job check and your advertising and in your position description, and you need to have records of that on their HR file. The next thing I want to talk about is the specificity of the work visas and how that impacts on your business. And this kind of goes back to that labour market test that I was talking about earlier, and the need to include the regions on your advertising. If you're hiring a migrant, so let's go back to our carpenter example. You're a business in the Bay of Plenty and you're hiring a carpenter. You've done your labour market test. You've identified that you can't find any suitably qualified carpenters in the Bay of Plenty. You've done your job check. You've got that approved. Your migrant has applied for their visa. On their visa, it will specify that they are hired for your business in the role of a carpenter in the region of the Bay of Plenty. It will also specify the minimum pay rate that they must be paid, and that's been set on your job check. Now, if you then you get a new contract and it's in the Waikato and you want to send your carpenter to go and work in the Waikato for the next 8 months, can you do that? Probably not. Their visa is specific to the region and it says Bay of Plenty. If you've got new contracts and you need to move your migrant to a new region, you're probably going to need to do a variation of conditions on their visa, and that's going to vary the condition that says Bay of Plenty. You're going to need a job check for that. Why will you need a job check? Because you have to test the labour market in the Waikato. Maybe there are loads of carpenters in the Waikato that you could be employing rather than moving your migrant from the Bay of Plenty. So it's really important to remember that when somebody is working in your business, it's not easy necessarily for those AWV holders to move into different regions or into different jobs. This includes promoting your employees. So if you're promoting them into a new role, probably going to need a job check and a variation of conditions for them. Now, there are some circumstances where this doesn't apply, and that kind of goes back to your ANSCO codes, and a really good example of this is chef. So chef has one ANSCO code, and that's for every level of chef, from commie chef all the way up to executive chef. You have a chef hired in your business and you're promoting them from commie chef to chef de partie to head chef, whatever it might be. You're unlikely to need a variation of conditions because it all sits under that same ANSCO code, and there isn't really an awful lot of change, perhaps some slight changes in their job description, but the kind of majority of the role remains the same. Okay, looking at specifically your AWV holders, some important obligations here. If your AWV holder is leaving your employment for any reason and they have more than a month left on their visa, you are required to inform Immigration New Zealand about this. For the most part, that can be done on Adept, which is the online Immigration New Zealand system that holds your accreditation and your job checks. If you are struggling to do that on Adept, you can do that on a form that you can complete and send to immigration. It can be tricky to find that. If you are in that situation, feel free to reach out because I've got the form saved on my desktop and I can help you with that. But you must inform immigration within 10 days that those migrant workers are leaving. Another really important thing, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in my next slide, is can you extend your AWV for your migrant workers? This is quite tricky, but it can be really crucial to retaining the skilled workers that you've got in your business. Some AWV holders can extend their visas and may be able to extend them by up to 24 months. This next thing that I want to talk to you about is the skills, minimum skills and English language requirements. Minimum skills is a new requirement for employers that came in, oh gosh, it's at least a year ago. I can't actually remember the exact date that this started. Now, this is important for, particularly if you're hiring migrants in those lower skilled roles. Thinking about the length of time the length of experience you require somebody to have to be able to do your job. It might just be a year. They might be on a low skilled ANSCO that only requires a year's previous work experience on that ANSCO code. And that's what you put on your job check, and that's what you're asking your migrant worker to prove, that they've got a year's previous relevant work experience to your job. However, they must also meet minimum skills. Everyone applying for an accredited employer work visa needs to meet minimum skills, and minimum skills says they either need 2 years of relevant work experience or a level 4 qualification that's relevant, possibly been assessed here in New Zealand if it hasn't been done here, or a bachelor's degree or higher. So if you're hiring in those low skilled roles, your migrants are unlikely, it's not impossible, but they're unlikely to have a bachelor's qualification. The level 4 qualification can get complex if they need to have it assessed here in New Zealand and expensive. So most migrants are looking at that work experience, and it's 2 years, even if your job only requires 1. English language requirements I touched on before, which is for all low skilled roles. They must demonstrate that they have English language abilities, and that often is through an English language test. My last thing that I wanted to talk about here, I'm conscious of time actually, so I might just skip forward to our next slide. Here we go. And a lot of this I've already talked about. The maximum length of the visa, 60 months or 5 years for those higher skilled roles, 36 months for those low skilled roles. That's your maximum continuous stay. Can you extend people's visas? Quite possibly. It is very complex. Who can get an extension? Who can't? Can you reuse the job token? Can you not? It is very complicated. It's a bit of a minefield. I would really strongly recommend you get some professional help to help you figure that out. You may be able to retain your migrant workers for up to an extra 2 years if you are clever about this and planning their future visas. Okay, let's push on and think about audit proofing for your business. So we've talked a little bit about post-compliance checks. They are done on approximately 16% of accredited employers and all triangular employers. What does a post-accreditation check look like? These can vary hugely. It can be from something as simple as providing a list of all your employees and the roles that they're in, through to full organizational charts, all your financials, full employee lists with start date, hourly rates, etc. It can really vary massively from one employer to another. You've got 10 working days to provide the information to Immigration New Zealand. And this is why you really want to keep your accreditation criteria and requirements really clear from the moment you get your first accredited employer visa holder walk through the door. Keep those HR files really clear. Make sure that you've informed immigration when your employees leave. If you've had key changes to key people in your business, changes of directors or of shareholders, make sure you've informed Immigration New Zealand. You've kept really clear records of that. Then the information is going to be at your fingertips if you do get a post-accreditation check and you've only got those 10 working days. I think for me, one of the really important things to mention on this slide is the privacy of your non-migrant employees. We always see with Immigration New Zealand that they will request full information of all your employees. You do not have to provide this for your non-migrant employees. I just provide initials for the most part. Okay, future proofing. I'm conscious that we may have questions, so I'm going to get through this part quite quickly. What can you do to future-proof your business? Now, this slide just quickly shows you some changes that have come in with employers just this year alone. So you can see that changes happen all the time with the immigration scheme. It's really important to keep on top of different changes and make sure that you understand how they impact on your business. And what can you do to make sure that your processes are up to date? There's a few things of interest to mention here. We've got 2 new residence pathways for skilled workers coming up from next year. They are due to start in August, and we will get further details on these in the first quarter of next year, hopefully. You may well have migrants working for you that could possibly get residence through either of these pathways. And there are some things to think about now particularly in terms of the remuneration that your migrants are on. If you look at that skilled work experience pathway, they need at least 2 years in New Zealand earning at least 1.1 times the median wage. Your employees might just be sitting slightly below that. And if you were able to just adjust their remuneration slightly, they might be on that pathway to residence. The trades and technician pathway is a little bit of a black hole at the moment. We know that there'll be a list of acceptable trades and technician roles. We don't know what that list looks like yet. Again, though, you're looking at least 18 months in a New Zealand role paid at or above median wage for that one. So that's the 33.56 an hour. Okay, can we go on to this? So this is just a little graphic for you that looks at those 2 new residence pathways, talks about the red and amber lists, which will come out at some point next year. Those will be the lists that will provide further detail for who can apply for those 2 residence pathways. If you're on the red list, your role is on the red list, you're basically going to be exempt from both of them. If you're on the amber list, you can probably apply for the skilled work one, but you're going to have some more criteria to meet on your application. Okay, some key changes. I've already mentioned that the employment agreement is no longer on the job check stage. That's now on the work visa. We can expect to see delays in processing on work visas as the team processing work visas will not be familiar with having to check the employment contracts. There's been some changes to the job check form recently. requesting additional information around the number of employees in your business and the number of those who are New Zealand citizens and residents. We've talked a lot about ANZCO today. Immigration are moving from ANZCO to a new list called the National Occupation List, or NOL. We'll see that change has already started. It's a gradual move. It actually started about a week ago. And we will see eventually that ANZCO will be no longer used and immigration will solely use NOL. One of the really good benefits for NOL is that we see a lot more kind of middle management roles on there, lots more supervisor, team leader roles. There's also about 90 roles on there that are classed at a higher skill on NOL than they were on ANZCO. Being clever about which list you use and when is really important, particularly for your job checks and your work visas. You really want to maximize the length of visa that you can get for your migrants. Okay, I kind of sped through those last ones, but hopefully that wasn't too garbled.
No, that was brilliant. It goes straight to the point, Helen. I really appreciate it. And I know what a mad rush that would have been. So we have had a few questions coming through, which is awesome. And it doesn't seem like they're too advicey, which is good. So if there are any, Helen, that you think, might be a bit too much leading into advice, then everyone, please keep in mind that Helen is here to be able to help you. So please, we will have her details at the end and you can absolutely reach out to her directly. The work that she does at Ames Global is amazing, and it will be awesome to see, your migrant workers coming through or you applying for the visa and actually getting the application through in one shot. So the first question, Helen, that came up was around clarity around the low skill roles. So somebody just wanted to know, do you only need to engage with wins for the low skill roles at level 4 and 5, or do you need to engage wins at for all kinds of roles and all different levels?
Yeah, it's just those low skilled roles. So those skill level 4 and 5 roles on ANZCO absolutely require some kind of engagement with wins and that 21-day advertising. For skill levels 1, 2, and 3, just 14 days of national advertising and no wins.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, very straight to the point. See? And also somebody else asked, does a promotion in a role, so somebody that's going from maybe junior to intermediate or intermediate to senior, does that also warrant updating Immigration New Zealand, or what is it fine to, I guess, to just have a increased letter or a promotional physical file?
It can do, and that can really depend on the industry and the job. So, for example, you're going from junior engineer to intermediate engineer. Unlikely to need a variation of conditions and the job check before that. It's still an engineer role. It's a small step up, so unlikely. But if you're going from team member, technician to regional manager, that's a whole different role.
Yes.
Totally different skill level, different role. You're definitely going to need a job check. You're going to need to test the labour market, and you'll need to do a variation of conditions. So it can really depend on the role, on the industry, and how your business is kind of structured in terms of its roles.
Yeah. And what I'm kind of hearing from it is, if it sounds like it's something that requires a brand new job description, every aspect of it has changed, you're probably looking at a variation.
Yeah, absolutely. So minor changes to the job description, that's going to be fine. Significant changes, you're looking at a variation and that job check requirement.
Yeah. And I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but somebody did ask, what are some of the new questions, or can you think of any that are in the job check form that have kind of come up recently that didn't exist before? I think you may.
Yeah. So I mentioned the having to record the number of total employees and the number of those who are New Zealand citizens and residents. That's new. You now have to put contact details for a dedicated person at the employer, which is new. So their name, their job title, their email, their telephone number. Those are all new requirements. Some of the questions have changed slightly in the way that they're phrased because the employment agreement's been removed off the job check and put on the work visa. We have seen a few slight changes to the wording of the questions and where they sit on the job check form around requirements to travel, bonding, etc. But the general feel behind those is the same. It's just you'll see them in slightly different places.
Okay. So, I mean, and like you've said, these are things that we were kind of tapping into or having to engage with before, but now it's just very
Mhm.
clearly laid out question.
Yes. I think for employers that haven't done job checks before,
Mm,
obviously I know what immigration want to see in an employment contract, and I'm making sure that my employers understand that when they're doing their job check.
that's
But if
right.
you've never done a job check before and you're looking at the form now, you're
Mm,
not really necessarily going to understand the requirements that the migrant's going to hit when they apply for their work visa. And the form can seem quite straightforward. Oh, yes, I'm going to do that, and I'm not going to do this.
yeah.
But it's kind of how that trickles on into the next stage that's quite critical to understand.
And that employment agreement is so critical because, you could go to a stock standard lawyer, someone like myself, and say
Mm,
that I need an employment agreement done, but that would look quite different. If you've got the bonding arrangements, the fact that you can't have your trial period clauses in there,
yep,
things like
yep,
that, that would be so different from a normal worker that you would hire,
yep.
in New Zealand. So just keep that in mind. Make sure that you really are structuring and tailoring it to, that particular visa and the accreditation process. But that's why you have,
Yes.
so you can always reach out. And so one of the other questions that came up, I know that we're going over, but we'll just go over slightly
Mhm.
and get through as many of these as possible. Helen, somebody asked and said, "Hi, Helen. Have you ever come across an instance where a job ad was accepted for the job check that didn't actually include any clearly stated annual salary or pay within the actual ad itself? It was just, quite broad in terms of no salary depicted."
No.
Okay. There we go.
Maybe back in the very
You
early
heard it
days
here first.
when, in the very early days when everybody was a bit kind of unsure of the process, we could squeeze a few through where employers hadn't done it properly, but these days, no.
Mm,
And the chances are that you'll lose your job check application fee, and you'll have to re-advertise and reapply for your job check.
mm,
So it's advertising again, which is a cost, and another job check application fee, which is a cost.
yeah.
So yeah, it's really important to get that advert fully compliant.
Mm. And I guess the question that I would want to probably know the answer to is, I know that you mentioned Immigration New Zealand generally has the list of where you should advertise and
Mhm.
the ways, to go about it. But have you seen people actually make efforts to advertise in those places and it still wasn't good enough? Or is it usually that is, if it's listed and you've done it, you've done your 14 days, then that's what you need?
Um, Look, if you've advertised that there isn't a published list of what the platforms are, you can kind of find it out on the job check form, but it's a bit tricky.
Mm,
If you have done your advertising properly, if it's compliant, you can clearly provide evidence of that, you've done your 14 days, you should be fine.
yeah.
There was an instance a while back where a particular national platform was acceptable, and then almost overnight, immigration decided it was no longer acceptable. And I certainly got caught with having been
Mm,
midway through job checks where they'd advertised on this particular platform and they started running into problems.
yeah.
Obviously, because of my kind of contacts within immigration, I was able to smooth those ones over. But an employer doing it themselves isn't necessarily going to be able to do that. I haven't seen that happen for a long time, though.
Yeah, and but that is something to keep in mind. I mean, something that you clearly showed as well, Helen, was how many
Mm.
changes there are actually that have come out in the last year at least. So
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
important to stay on top of them. And I know this is leaning into advice, but somebody did ask, I'm an accredited employer, employees coming over with very senior engineering experience. Will this be quite straightforward? And to that, I would say, no, not necessarily. I mean, you could see just from this particular scenario, let's say that it was a time when it ticked over and you needed to advertise or
Yeah.
do things in a particular way. So I don't think it's necessarily as simple just because you've already got the accreditation. Would I be right in saying that, Helen?
Yeah, that's right. You know, it's really important to capture those migrants that have got the
Yeah.
skills that your business needs, and you find great candidates and you want to get them. One of the key things that I do is that I really love to work with the migrant and the job check at the same time, so that I can make sure the job check suits the migrant and the migrant suits the job check. So,
Yeah.
that makes it so much smoother and easier for the business, making sure that everything matches across, but also is compliant with what immigration want to see. So we
Mm,
don't want to ask for too much because the migrant can meet it, and then it's going to run into problems with what immigration request. We don't want to make it too loose, and then you can't meet your labour market test. So it's a real kind of balancing between all of
mm.
those different issues.
Yeah. And I'll do the last two questions and then we'll wrap up. I know that you mentioned, and it perked up my ears as well. What are the other platforms, or could you name one or two that you could use to get less traffic? I know that you mentioned that there could be.
Yeah, Indeed, JobSpace is one that I
Okay.
use all the time. So those two are really good. If you are recruiting in particular industries, you can use some industry job boards, which are very specific rather than doing Trade Me or Seek. But also if you're actually advertising and you're really trying to find people, you might want to use one of the ones that's got higher traffic, because
Yeah.
you're actually looking for, ideally you're trying to find a New Zealander, and if that doesn't work, then you're doing your job check. So it kind of depends on the purpose behind that advertising in the first instance.
And as an employer, it takes a lot to get to that stage of accreditation, and
Mm.
it is quite costly. So you're thinking about it in terms of, can I truly find someone locally?
Yes.
You're reducing costs significantly when it comes to that.
And most employers would love to be able to hire New Zealanders. It's much, you don't have to go through all of the stress and time and expense of accreditation and job check. But that just isn't realistic for
Yeah.
so many employers. It's just not possible. And they've been advertising for months and months and months for their jobs and haven't been able to fill them.
Yeah, and I would see it all the time when I worked in the hospitality industry.
Mm.
It's so common. The last question, Helen, I won't keep you for too much longer. And this is a very interesting question. It was, I've advertised, I've gone through the process, 60 applicants, they're all unsuitable. Is this still okay to proceed to migrant workers? That question, I don't think that is necessarily the question to be asked. It's more so, what's the evidence that you have around these people not being suitable? Is that more what it should be?
That's right. On the job check, you have to provide information about the total number of applications, how many of them were New Zealanders, and how many of the New Zealanders were suitably skilled for the role, and how many did you hire. So, you may have 60 applications. Is your advert compliant, first of all? If it's not, you might need to re-advertise. You might get 65 this time round, you might get 30, who knows?
Yeah.
What have you done with those 60 applicants to discount them or include them? I have to say, I've never worked with an employer and not been able to show that they've met the labour market test, even pre-accreditation in the old days of essential skills work visas. It's really hard to find the skills that you need in New Zealand, but it's about making sure that you've done your due diligence, you've done your checking, you're presenting it in the right way.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. A lot of what I would come up against was absolutely the same thing. You can see that clearly people are not suitable for the role, but has
Mm.
the employer actually broken down their way of assessing that? And it's not just a matter of no, it's because they can't do X, Y, and Z. It goes a little bit beyond that. So
Yeah.
having that in order will make a huge difference. Well, this is we've still got quite a few questions there, but I think we've covered the general gist of them. Thank you so much, Helen. This has been amazing. There's Helen's details on the screen for you all. And if you're listening to the recording, then please absolutely click on the link, go on through and check out Helen's LinkedIn, and also check out Ames Global, because like I said, if you are somebody that needs specific advice, you are trying to, engage migrant in the process and engage with migrant workers, or maybe you're somebody wanting to come through the visa application through to New Zealand, then you need a little bit of help. I know how difficult this process can be. And I am so glad I'm never having to do this, moving forward. But I absolutely kudos to you, Helen, for having so much knowledge and just information around this, and going through the process yourself. So thank you so much for your time, everyone, for being here. Helen, thank you for sharing your expertise. I know I've taken a lot of notes as I've been going through this, and it's been sparking a lot of, further questions and curiosity. So I really appreciate it. Everyone, please know, like I said, that this is all recorded. It will be sent to you with additional information. If you need specific advice, reach out to Helen. And aside from that, there will be a quiz that will pop up at the end of this, just a little survey to ask you what you think about this webinar. If you have any suggestions or ideas, always let us know so that we know whether they should just axe me or if we should, get someone else to come in. So thank you so much, everyone. Helen, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And we'll be so happy to have you along for the next one.
You're very welcome.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Have a good afternoon.